Gosh, this is that time of the year that things are just like really crazy. We're all kind of running to the finish line, and not quite at the point where I'm ready to reflect on the year. But I think a lot of good things happened. Really pleased with the legislative session. Certainly you can always want more, but I think that we really were in a hole, and they've really helped to, and we're being looked at, which is really kind of exciting, as a model. We've been written up in, everything from the New York Times to Forbes to the Wall Street Journal as a model for, how do we make public higher education affordable. And so that's, really kind of exciting. And, we're still in the process of putting together what exactly the budget means, et cetera. We're still in the middle of admissions, but I think that we will have, some of the things that we've been hearing a lot from students, and, you'll tell me, I'm sure, whether I'm right or wrong, but is the need for more support services, in particular, whether it's in terms of mental health, career advising, et cetera. And I think that, as you know, we've been putting quite a bit of our own money to backstop the state need grant, and assuming that now we don't have to do that backstop, it frees up some money so that we can put into the kinds of support services that we think are so important, to make sure that students not only get in and get a good education, but that they actually can graduate. So, feeling pretty good about that.
Great. I want to talk about the UWPD for a second. After the report was released and Vincent's moving over to his new role, what can you tell us about his specific responsibilities in this new role? It sounds like he's going to be communicating with UWPD a lot still. Is that actually going to be the case? If not, what is his job?
I think the person who could fill you in more on the details is really Denzel, because he will continue to be meeting with Denzel. I think he'll be doing more around strategic planning. He will not be involved in the day-to-day operational work of UWPD, but more in terms of Chief Vincent was very involved in setting up some of the kinds of neighborhood policing models that we have, and he'll continue to do some of that kind of work for us, but he will not be involved in the day-to-day operation of UWPD.
From our reporting, this is from a line in our latest article, that specifically the review found that Vincent's leadership, or at least officers' quote perception of his leadership, quote, has had a chilling impact on the willingness of employees to openly participate in decision-making, created a fear of retaliation among many, and likely deprived decisions of critical information from those close to the issue or problem. Can you explain the decision to keep him in the administration?
Well, again, he's not going to be involved in the operational details. The report, if you looked at it, also talked about him being very visionary in terms of the creation. And again, he's going to be more involved in the planning. It's not like, that's a lot about managing staff, and that he will not be in a position where he'll be managing many staff. What we want to do is capitalize on the strengths which are very much there, and allow the police department to develop 10 years in any job is a long time. And I think both he and we felt that it was time for him to be doing something different. Oh, come on.
Come on, guys, you have any questions?
The UW sustainability goals, one of the goals is that UW should reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 15% compared to 2005 levels by 2020. So to meet the goal, UW needs to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 6% compared to 2016 levels. Since 2010, UW has only reduced greenhouse gas emissions by 1%. So I was wondering what UW is doing to make those changes necessary to meet those goals.
We're doing a range of things. Everything from, we are trying to drive down the number of single vehicle that we have, and that is absolutely critical, because that's one of the major ways. We also are, as you know, as we replace our fleet of cars, we're going almost entirely either electric or hybrid. And so that's, one of the things we're doing. We're also doing much more. All our new buildings are at least LEED silver, which means that they're much more energy efficient. So every time that we have a new building replacing an old building, we're really, replacing, in essence, an energy hog, because that's how, old buildings were built without really much attention to how much energy. And so, we're really working a lot more in terms of, clean energy. We're doing more in terms of monitoring. We still have way too many lights that get turned on. So we have a range of things that we are doing, but also how we do purchasing, et cetera. It's, all the way up and down. And like I say, I'll be honest, I can't get into the weeds on it, but we have some really good people that are working on it. And I think that, as a state, we really are. I mean, this is Governor Inslee's platform going forward, and we have been very involved in doing stuff with the electrical grid.
And yeah, like you said, the 40% of the emissions are from commuting. Do you think that UW should fully fund UPass for all employees?
I think that, we have made that negotiation with our classified staff. I'm totally open to having that discussion with our faculty and with our professional staff, but we need to realize that it's not a question of giving someone a free UPass costs the university money. It's a form of compensation. And so would we rather have this as compensation as opposed to salary or healthcare benefits or whatever? I'm happy to have that discussion. At this point, our most poorly paid employees, I don't mean poorly paid as are employees with the lowest salaries. They are paid, pretty much at market rate compared to others, but with the lowest salaries, do have a subsidized UPass, and I think that's a good thing. The other thing that we, recently did is, we came in and originally our thought was that we were going to raise the cost of the UPass some and the cost of parking some, and with sustainability in mind, we ended up keeping the keeping the rates of the UPass the same and increasing the cost of parking even more. And so, there's various ways in which you encourage people to use mass transit. I mean, a lot of what's really increased, and I think it's important to realize that by continuing that the cost of the UPass, even though to the employee it seems like the university is paying the same, we've been paying more and more to the UPass because people are using it more and more. Because we get paid by use. And so once we put in the station over there, and once that one opens, it will be costing us more money to keep the UPass at the same rate at which it is now. And I hope people use it more. I mean, there's no question that that people are already incentivized to use mass transit, to use the UPass over parking, and the cost of parking, especially single occupancy vehicle, is just going to continue to rise.
I think it is also important to point out that, we might be incentivizing public transportation, but if you're a student who lives in like Bothell or Peoria,
Absolutely.
Tacoma, that public transportation simply is not as feasible. So what is being done to ensure that these commuter students who probably do rely on those single occupancy vehicles just to be able to come here, the school that they're already paying thousands of dollars in tuition for, what is being done to make sure that the financial burden on them is eased up, be that through more affordable housing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
We focus on the cost of tuition, et cetera. I mean, we are not again, the UPass is available. There are buses that come from Bothell. Where I live, I'm equidistant to Bothell, as to students can end up deciding that they're going to go to UW Bothell instead of UW Seattle, and UW Seattle is too big a commute. Those are decisions that students have to make.
But I'm not asking about the decisions.
What I'm saying is
that
that
the decisions of students who live in these areas and go to UW Seattle, because
Yeah.
they have just as much of a right to an accessible education.
And what I'm saying is they do. They can end up deciding how accessible their education is by deciding where they're going to go. We are not going to provide, buses for students no matter where they live. We're not in that business.
Thank you.
Going back to the unionized,
But I do want to say that there are actually, you can get from Bothell to University of Washington, Seattle, on, I believe, one bus or
Oh, you
with
don't
one
have to tell me,
transfer.
I took that bus for 2 years.
Yeah.
But even then, I still had to make that drive to the Boston Park and ride.
And what solutions do you have to bring to the table? What are you expecting?
I was hoping for more affordable. I was hoping for more affordable housing because.
Oh, okay, you want to talk about housing, then let's talk about housing. It sounded like you were expecting that we would provide transportation from wherever you lived, and I was going to say that's not, we're not, we support the light rail, we support buses, but we don't decide where the routes go. In terms of affordable housing, if you were going to tell me what is the single biggest challenge that we face as a university, it is housing. There is no question about that. Part of what's happened is not just the actual cost of housing, but how quickly it has, gone up. And so, we are not like some places like, UCLA. I mean, some of the other cities that have been expensive for a long time, they have, in many cases, a lot of land, and they have faculty housing, they have staff housing, whatever. We have made a lot of investment in student housing, and over the last 10 years, we've built a lot of dorms, and we're hoping that is part of the solution. We're also in conversations with the city about the possibility of private-public partnerships in terms of building housing, and we're looking at building housing both near the university but also near light rail stations, so that the commute would be easier, and that would be public-private, that they would be geared towards low to middle income families, but that University of Washington employees, faculty, students might have priority. So we're in lots of discussions to see what we can do in terms of housing. There is no immediate answer. It's not like we can build like that, and there isn't a whole lot of land, and we don't have a lot of debt capacity. So we have a lot of constraints, but I agree with you, that's one of our number one priorities, and we're doing a lot of work right now seeing what's possible.
I had a question.
Yeah.
We recently published an article about your interactions and relationship with Candace Faber, and I was wondering if you had read the article,
Mm-hmm.
and what your reaction to that is.
I did read the article. I had, I don't really have a relationship with her. We had a couple of email exchanges,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that you did a reasonable job reporting on it.
Do you think that the content of that article and what we reported on had any effect on the university environment or any sort of message that is sent to students regarding survivors and how survivors are supported within this university?
I think that we have been working hard, and we still have more to do in terms of how we support survivors at this university. And I think that we've been working very closely. Some of the things that we're going to be doing in the year to come is doing mandatory training with our faculty and staff on both sexual and gender harassment as well as race harassment, because we think that there is, in particular, what we want to work on is creating a culture where things are less likely to happen. And in fact, what the research tends to suggest is that if the culture allows gender harassment, there's much more apt to be sexual assault and and overt sexual harassment. So we're in the process of rolling out some new training. We are one of the founders of a group that the National Academy of Sciences is putting together of universities around the country, where we're looking at best practices because we want to learn other universities that are doing it better. We want to learn how they can do it better, both in terms of supporting survivors and also in terms of how do we, are there better methods to use in terms of disciplinary actions, et cetera. So we're constantly trying. I think that this is a very, very important problem and an important issue, and we want to be a leader in this area.
And what's the office that's helping lead that training?
Our Title IX.
Okay.
office, but we're working with the Title IX office, but also with our faculty senate. I mean, some of what we have, there's some research that suggests that bad training can be worse than no training at all, and we really are trying to see what are other universities done that they think works that we don't work, and we want to. I think it's important. What a lot of places do is there's some course that you take online. And we may decide that that is one thing that we want to do, but we really want to do more work within the departments, so that it would be more face-to-face small group training, not just the online training. And we want to make sure that we do it right.
I actually want to know, it does sound like, you do have this value specifically to make the environment safer for students, but I'm wondering if you also extend that value to faculty themselves.
Of course. Mm-hmm. I mean, no question. I mean, when we're talking about creating, I mean, the training that we're doing for faculty isn't just in terms of students. It's in terms of the kind of gender harassment, etc., that happens within departments. Sometimes it's senior faculty members against junior faculty members, or the whole range of stuff. Absolutely, this is not just about students. This is about faculty. This is about staff.
Mm-hmm. And how do you think that the university can also maybe work towards helping students or faculty sort of recover from these traumas, even if the actual trauma did not happen on campus?
Well, I think that we know that creating an environment that's supportive is absolutely critical.
Do you think this environment is supportive of Candace Faber then?
I think that Candace Faber has made an accusation about someone that is unsubstantiated. Mm-hmm. She has chosen, and I respect her choice, not to take this forward either in terms of a criminal investigation, or she could do it in terms of a civil investigation. I believe in the rule of law, and I do believe that I certainly, want us to be the kind of place that supports survivors. But we also, I do not believe that we should be the kind of place that works to punish individuals based on an accusation. I mean, it's interesting. If you think about Me Too, and I think the Me Too movement is incredibly important, but part of why we call it Me Too is, first of all, that when we start talking about, have you experienced, whether it's harassment or assault, the number of women that say Me Too is very high. But the other is that after a number of these very visible accusations, whether we're talking about Brett Kavanaugh or Bill Cosby or Weinstein, an accusation came out there, there were choruses of Me Too. This is not that situation.
Given that ACO, and this is about the events surrounding in the winter quarter with the snow and communication and emergency situations, given that the ASU has finally managed to pass a bill that reflects the student body's overall feelings about how the UW handles emergency situations and other incidents on campus, how is the administration currently planning on pairing up with ASU leadership, and how will those efforts continue into next year to discuss how this bill will be implemented?
We are having those discussions in terms of snow in particular. We are purchasing some more snow equipment. I think it's important to keep in mind that that was a 100-year event, but nonetheless we want to be climate change. I mean, we're getting more 100-year events, so we are doing more work. And I think we're also trying to find more avenues of communication, which I think was one of the issues that was there, is that one of the things that's really hard, and you folks know about this as well as I do, is that social media can pick up things from a moment to another, and so part of what happened there is that due to social media, a whole bunch of people believe something happened that in fact didn't happen. This was not a student who slipped and died as a result of a slip on the ice, but that was widely what speculation was, and it created a sense of panic, and campus wasn't safe, et cetera, et cetera. And how we can communicate at the same speed of social media is something that everyone is trying to deal with. But I think we will be using social media more as an avenue for communication as well.
Well, so there's two ways that UW alerts get sent out, and that's one of them's email, which not everyone checks that frequently. Would you consider, in text on the other hand, is always opt-in, would you consider making text one of the primary ones instead of email?
You know, I do view text as one of our primary, but it is opt-in. I'm certainly more than happy to have a discussion about making it mandatory, but you know, that does mean for some people, it does mean they'll be charged, et cetera, et cetera. And so at this point, you know, we are trying to give choice to students rather than mandate it. But if students come to us and, you know, if in conversations there's a feeling of this is absolutely critical that we mandate, we can go there.
Actually, speaking of social media, we do this is completely unrelated, but we sometimes, you know, look to social media groups that like UW students are involved in, like just for story ideas. And I personally see a lot of students repeatedly complain about, you know, not getting into specific majors, most of them being STEM. And the complaints have, over time, gotten so severe that they themselves have a much more, I feel like, desperate quality. And I'm wondering if in the future, the UW might be attempting to at least change the culture around capacity-constrained majors, and specifically maybe change the culture around extreme preference of STEM, or if there's just more work being done to like expand those majors even more so that everyone can get into those majors.
All of the above.
Okay.
No, it's funny because I was just, we were just meeting with faculty senate chair and the provost, and we were talking about exactly those kinds of issues. First of all, I think that social media, you know, like everything else, it has, you know, huge pluses. You know, I'm back in touch with a number of my high school friends that I'd lost touch with, and you know, I feel like it's, you know, connects me to them in all kinds of ways, and you know, I think that there are, you know, wonderful positives, but we know that actually, particularly, and again, you know, as you know, I do work on adolescence and mental health issues. That often depressed women that can just bring each other down, because it's like, you know, this is really terrible. Well, it's even worse than you thought, you know, and all of a sudden there's kind of a spiraling down, and so social media can have that quality. Not to mention that if you spend too much of your life on social media and not outside getting some sun, that can have its issues as well. I think we're trying a number of different strategies. Certainly one of the things that we did get in the legislative session, in addition to foundational support, was STEM dollars, so that we can increase the capacity, particularly in engineering, where we are very capacity constrained. We know that it's not just engineering, we also have capacity constraints in some of the sciences and others, but it allows us to do that there. And often being able to increase capacity in one increases capacity down the line, because you have students that are going into this because they couldn't go into that, and that kind of thing. So yes, we're trying. Also, I think we are experimenting more with direct admission to majors, so that students have a better sense of did they get in or did they not get in. And so, you know, and we're monitoring that to make sure that, you know, whether that affects diversity, et cetera, in those majors. And so, you know, we're trying to be very careful. We're going slowly in that direction. But we also are, and we've been having some conversations about, you know, I think that there are a lot of myths out there. I mean, look, I want students who want to go into STEM to be able to go into STEM. I want, you know, people from a variety of different backgrounds. I want women to feel that STEM is accessible to them, underrepresented minorities that may not, you know, feel that it's accessible to them, et cetera. But I also feel that it's almost gotten to a point where people feel that if they get into STEM, they're going to get a job, and if they don't get into STEM, they're not. And I think we need to kind of bust that myth. You know, I mean, I was very much a liberal arts. I was an English psychology, you know, double major. I actually got minors in philosophy and history. My niece and nephew went to school here. He was a geography major. She was an English major. Both of them actually own homes. They're in their 30s. They own homes. They, you know, they're married. They have children. They pay for their children's preschool. And like I say, they're English and geography majors. He does city planning. She's actually a screenwriter. And they, they don't, I'm not sending them money. They don't need it. And so, I think we need to kind of bust some of these myths. There really are jobs available in with a range of majors. And again, if a student is going into STEM because that's what they care about and that's what they want to do, yay. If they're going into STEM because, someone's telling them that's the only way they're going to get a job and what they'd really like to do is be a history major, I hope that they can, think about, gee. We're also doing some things like we are talking about the possibility of doing a data science minor. We already have an entrepreneurship minor. So that students, sometimes it's not a question of you need a whole major in STEM, but maybe, I think it does make a lot of sense to have some good numeracy, some good tech skills. So how can you combine that with an English major or a history? So we want to, we've been talking about how do we make it more possible for students to follow what their passions are, even if they're outside of STEM, and giving them better information about what kinds of jobs really are available. Because, I was asked, I met with an honor students group, and they asked me, why don't you care more about the humanities and social sciences? And I said, it's not me, it's why don't you care more, or your parents care more, or whatever. But, some of these areas, we do try and put resources where we have student bodies. And that's just absolutely critical.
I think this is a good transition into mental health and mental health funding. So student services and Hall Health are currently facing major physical challenges.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, we've been informed that it is possible that Hall Health will have to cut major services within the next few weeks, given that we face a mental health crisis on campus, and Hall Health is one of the major mental health care facilities on campus available to students. How is the administration planning on working with Hall Health and the student activities fee to work collaboratively on these issues to preserve existing student services?
Well, as you know, we just got our budget, and we actually are going to be spending most of the next month making budgetary decisions.
Right.
Students have made it very clear that this is a priority for them. It should be a priority for them.
Mm-hmm.
I have no doubt that there will be some additional funding. I can't give you the dollar amount at this point.
In the same area as funding and budgetary decisions, there's been a lot of strife in the last year or so with a lot of the university's unionized workers. So I wanted to ask whether the university is taking steps to avoid future closures and layoffs like that of Consolidated Laundry, where the jobs of about 100 unionized and heavily immigrant and female and people of color workers were outsourced, and they either lost their jobs or experienced instability.
Actually, every single, at this point I can say that every single worker in the laundry who wanted to stay at the UW got a job at the UW.
Okay.
And I can give you the exact numbers of of jobs that we did make available, but we were able to place every single worker that wanted to stay at the UW. I feel very good about that.
Okay. Yeah, I would be interested in seeing those numbers.
Yeah.
But I still feel like I've witnessed a lot of unhappiness, to say the least, among the unionized employees. I remember at town hall, specifically in December, that you were at.
Mm-hmm.
You spoke with other city and state lawmakers, and I wanted to hear what you took away from that and what action has been taken with either just inside your office and the university or with those lawmakers in response.
Well, we did come to agreements with the unions on compensation, et cetera. And so, and I think that both sides feel good about where we ended up. Not what I have loved to have been able to give larger raises. Of course, I would have loved to have done that, but I think that we ended up in a good place. I think that the major issue that they're dealing with, which is the major issue that you're dealing with, which is the major issue that faculty that's coming here, is the high cost of living in Seattle. And our state does not, at the level of public schools, they give extra compensation for people who live in the Puget Sound region. They don't do that at the state level when it comes to giving money to us, let's say, versus Eastern Washington or Central Washington, et cetera. And so it does create some real issues for us, and that's why we're looking at affordable housing and other kinds of areas. I think that we have developed better working relationships with unions than we've had in the past. And I think that they would say that, but you need to check with them. But we still have some more work to do.
I have another union question regarding the lawsuit that UW House Staff Association filed against the UW when they came at the last Board of Regents meeting and announced that it was for UW's refusal to meet and collectively bargain outside of work hours with medical residents. I was wondering if there has been movement on that issue or if the UW intends to engage with that lawsuit.
I believe that it's not a lawsuit per se. I believe that what they've done is filed a grievance.
Sure.
But Victor, if you'll take a note, we can get back to you on those details, and we'll see where that grievance goes. I believe that we are working very hard to try and be flexible in terms of our ability to bargain, and but we can only flex so much.
As far as ADA compliance goes, or just really accessing the campus in general, disabled students,
Yep, we have
students
some real
with
issues
disabilities
there.
have a lot of challenges getting around campus. What is being done to make the campus more accessible so that disabled students can have full access to the education programs that the UW
Yeah,
offers?
absolutely. I mean, ADA issues are very much, on the agenda in terms of funding. We're going to be spending quite a bit of money in terms of parking lots, for example. The one right out here, I don't remember if it's
N22.
N22, okay, that is, just not, it's, part of the issue that we deal with is, one is we're an older campus. Two, we are in a hilly area, so we're not a flat campus. And two, we have wonderful trees that, nobody wants to cut down, and I'm not suggesting that we do, but that have. And so we are doing, and we have already done a look at, for example, parking lots, to see, what are the issues there, and we're going to be doing a lot of work. We're doing resurfacing in other areas. So we have a number of plans in place. They are expensive, but they're absolutely critical that we do that. We're looking at classrooms and, basically doing some upgrading in terms of ADA is very much, and I can answer you with more detail if you'll just email me. I mean, I don't have, I wish I could tell you exactly what we're doing, but I can tell you I've been at numerous meetings around ADA compliance. We know that it's an issue, and we are working on it.
So this is actually based on what we talked about earlier with greener buildings. Are newer buildings also
Yes.
being made with, okay, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all our new buildings, that is, front and center is, can you get in with a wheelchair, where do we need elevators, et cetera. I mean, it's not an issue with new buildings, it's mostly an issue with our older buildings. And so we're focusing particularly, part of why N22, I believe, one of the ones the one right outside the hub, so it must be N22, is, front and center, is because it's near the hub and near a student center. And, but I'm saying that it's always harder to retrofit than to build. There's no question that everything new that's being built is very ADA compliant, but it's more about how do we retrofit the old buildings and what order are we going in, et cetera.
Last year, I asked you a question about how, within that school year, how you've failed forward, and this was before you had an event around that same subject. What do you think? How do you think you failed forward this year?
Okay. Gosh. I certainly wish we would have, I think that we took longer than we should have in responding and getting information out to students around the snow event. Again, I think that it took us a while to realize how the communication was going, and I wish we would have been more responsive, right away there. I mean, if you give me time, I'm sure I could think of a lot of things that I wish we'd responded to more quickly. But I actually feel pretty good about the year. That doesn't mean, having me try and come up that, I'm not trying to say that it's been perfect. Believe me, I'm not. But I'm just saying that it's not like, you know, something very major comes to mind right away.
If you think of something later, feel free to.
Okay, okay. Yeah.
Do we have any sort of a real plan about how to deal with our backlog of maintenance?
Well, the first, I mean,
I know there's
as
no money, and I know that the focus is on new buildings, but we have a lot of old buildings here, and honestly, they're just.
no, I mean, we have about, you know, $2 billion backlog in terms of deferred maintenance. You know, our obviously, one of the things that we're doing, I mean, I think the first step in getting out of the hole is to stop digging. And so as new buildings come on, especially more and more new buildings are coming on because of private dollars, because we're not getting the dollars from the state to build, is we are requiring that they also not only pay for the building, but have an endowment to pay for maintenance so that we don't get further behind. We are putting more into maintenance now than we have in the past. In terms of our priority, we're putting more money into maintenance than we have in the past, but we're going a step at a time. And you know, you're absolutely right. It's not that we're ignoring it, but we're not going to take care of a $2 billion problem over the next 5 years. But we're chipping away at it, and we're making sure that we're not adding to it, so that, you know, one of the things that's nice about new buildings is they also, it's not just that they require less maintenance, but they often are more energy efficient, et cetera. And it's always, you know, one of these things of, you know, new building versus, you know, I mean, some of our older building remodels like Savory, you know, was really, you know, as you know, we at once had a plan to restore the core in all of these buildings, and then it kind of fell off the state agenda. So, I mean, I wish I had an answer, but I can tell you that if you look at our budget now as opposed to a year or two ago, more is going into, we're putting more into maintenance than we have in the past.
Do you have a sense of how much money that is? I mean, is there a dollar figure that's?
I can certainly get you that.
That would be great.
Sure.
Thank you.
We wanted to ask how you think demographics at the university in students and with staff and faculty will change now that it appears the state's ban on affirmative action is being rescinded.
Okay, let me just talk about the stages in that. It goes into effect June 28th. As you know, there's a citizens initiative, you know,
July 28th.
what?
July 28th.
Right, July 28th, right. But I'm saying that they're trying to get enough signatures to put it out to a vote. If that happens before July 28th, most likely the law won't go into effect and it will go to
The November ballot.
the November ballot. We don't know. Right now, we're, you know, kind of look and see, and we're beginning to put our groups together to see how we might change some of our admissions. You know, we have done a lot in terms of looking at, you know, at income and other markers of adversity, and our numbers on diversity, of course, our numbers of diversity are higher now than before affirmative action was eliminated. Now, so is diversity in the state. So, you know, I expect that we will see changes at the margins, but I don't think it's going to be dramatic. In other words, you know, I don't think that there's going to be this, you know, huge shift, but I think we will see significant change. We'll see changes at the margins that will be significant.
So I know that surrounding the events of the bake sale, a lot of students are feeling offended and hurt. And there's a delicate balance between hate speech and free speech, but how are you?
There is no, I mean, we are not a country that has a definition for hate speech. There are countries, for example, Germany, where they do have here hate speech. There is no legal definition of hate speech. Hate speech, as you and I talk about it, is free speech.
So my question is, how would you alleviate the concerns of students who feel hurt?
Well, I think that, you know, I've certainly made, as I think you're aware of, my own statement about what I thought about the bake sale. And I do think that it wasn't just the bake sale, but the fact that it was done in a context of a number of other actions by this particular group, and that I did think that it was hurtful, etc. I also think that it was free speech. And I was very proud of how our students, particularly our students of color, the students that were very involved in the ECC, etc., they decided that they were going to do active ignoring. And I think that that was a very wise move. The Native American students made over $10,000 in their bake sale. And I think that Poly Days was as joyous as I've ever seen it. And I think that they ended up looking fairly foolish. And I think that, the more that happens, those kinds of tactics, okay, to do something that's very inflammatory, is the way in which a group that is very, very small creates a very, very big megaphone. And I think that, we have to think about how do we take that megaphone away. I do think that the dangers of, if there was ever a time when you wanted to be thinking about curtailing free speech, this is not the moment. We have, as you well know, a war on journalism. This is not the moment to be thinking about curtailing free speech historically. And many of you have probably done, your research. Free speech has protected people like me, underrepresented minorities, women, LGBT people. It has allowed us to have voice when in fact, it's protected unions. You have to, at this particular moment, folks your age, you've seen free speech often end up protecting really noxious. But that historically, free speech has been a real tool for, in fact, freedom, for allowing people to have voices that are anti-government. And I think that we need to be very careful about thinking about curtailing that, because again, I think particularly in this particular environment, we have a lot of people that would love to see more censorship and would love to see a lot less free speech, and it's not because they want to stop hurting people.
I do think it is worth pointing out that maybe this year there was an example of people of color taking a stand against the Utah College Republicans. But last year, I remember that the Everybody fashion show was canceled. The FI UTS Culture Fest, this is an event that was delayed. There were numerous security concerns going on because this particular group was saying that they wanted to exercise their right to free speech. And the defense that was extended to these other groups who were also had their own rights to free speech. Their defense, the UW administration did not really come to it to quite the same degree as to the UW-CR. So I'm wondering what is being done to address this imbalance where one group in particular that is predominantly run by, let's be honest, white men versus these groups that are predominantly meant to empower more marginalized people. What is being done to address this imbalance in terms of UW's relationship with free speech?
First of all, I think that, if we want to go back to last year, the situation was very different in that we had a credible threat of violence. We certainly, we did not cancel these events. These were events that the groups decided to cancel, I think appropriately so, because they erred on the side of safety. If they had decided to go on, they would have gotten police protection, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to be very clear about who canceled what. I think they did the right thing, I want to be very clear, but we did not cancel those events. But we had a credible threat of violence that did not come from the UW-CR, but from some of the other groups that were associated with. When we get a credible threat of violence, we have to share that with other people. It would have been irresponsible for us not to do that. For the bake sale, we did not have any credible threat of violence. So I think that they're very different events and very different situations.
I don't know if that answered my question, though.
Okay.
What is being done to address this? What is being done to address this imbalance? Because you're right. These two events were very, very different. Patriot Prayer versus a bake sale. Right. Very, very different. They're different in our context. But
But I'm not sure what you mean by the imbalance. We're not taking away free speech rights from our students of color or anything like that. They choose not to act like jerks, which I think is a wonderful thing to do. But if they decided to act like jerks, they would have the right to do that as well.
But what is UW doing to advocate for the right to free speech?
What do you mean? I mean, we're all over the place advocating for the right to free speech.
I mean, like,
I've been
yes,
more outspoken.
Yeah, you're making statements, but I'm talking in terms of action. Are you making it clear to these groups that, you know, if they were to stage these events at the same time as this other group that has consistently created events where there is a credible threat of violence, will these groups be protected?
Absolutely.
What is being done to make this clear, to make this environment clear?
You and I aren't communicating with each other that well, and I apologize for that, but I'm not sure I understand your question. I mean, whenever any one of our student groups puts on an event, we offer them security. You know, the Polynesian students were able to put on their event. The Native American students were able to do their bake sale. You know, if the students had decided to go and do the everybody, we would have offered them police protection as well. We've made that very clear that, we will protect any student doing any event that goes through any a registered student organization putting on an event. We work with them to make sure they can do that event as safely as possible. So, I mean, so I don't know what.
To hop on to that, I don't really have a question, but just like, I'm just gonna propose a statement. Like you said, like free speech doesn't have a perfect definition legally, but fighting words do, and they're not constantly protected. And I think the students have become a little bit fuzzy on the line, because I think we've pushed the border and we've approached fighting words with certain events because there has been some violence. And I think the students are just kind of confused about the policies and then what Michigan's going to do, because fighting words and free speech basically have like a 5-word difference in definitions, and it's just really confusing to us. And I guess we really need a clear example and precedent for the future, essentially.
Okay, I'm trying.
I'm not asking a question. I'm just like reflecting my own.
Right. No, I hear what you're saying. I'm trying to think of how I can clarify that any better. And certainly, for example, in terms of if there was a group that we're going to. We're going to bring guns, or we're going to whatever. We would, do everything we could to stop that. But I mean, fighting. I mean, I think it's important to be clear. Maybe this is what's confusing. Is fighting words are not provocative words. There are certain words that may well make me want to fight you. If you say certain things to me. But when we talk about fighting words in the legal sense, what we're talking about is threats of violence. We're not talking about fighting words in the sense of something that would make me so pissed off that I want to, punch you. What we're talking about is an actual threat of violence. Anyone, I'm going to sell poison cookies.
Has the UW curbed speech in that realm ever before, to your knowledge?
Not that I can think of. I mean, we certainly have, for example, on a number of events, have the police at perimeter checking people to see if they're bringing in guns, etc. Mm-hmm. And but I don't think that that has happened that I can think of, at least not since I've been doing this job.
This is going back to budget questions. Even though the state budget won't be reformed for a few years now,
Won't be reformed for a few years. What do you mean?
We have it set until 2021.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Is there any hope for seeing more state funding in public universities in the future?
Well, certainly, we hope this is the beginning. I mean, this is not the end. We are still, I can't, we haven't redone the dollar figure per student, but my hunch is we're still down in the bottom 10% of the top schools in terms of state funding. So this is a good down payment towards the future, but, I think we're not there yet, and we will continue to advocate for a bigger share of the pie. But I think that there's a couple of things that are really important. It's not just that we got the foundational support, but this professional B&O tax. I don't remember the exact. Victor, can you help me with is that?
HB 2158.
Yes, yeah, HB 2158. I don't remember the exact wording. But basically, what's really nice about that is for the first time that certainly in my history here, we have a dedicated tax for higher education. And what's really nice about that dedicated tax is it's fairly recession-proof. In other words, I mean, some people advocate capital gains. I'm not at all against capital gains, but capital gains, tax on capital gains, when times are good, capital gains are high. When you have a recession, capital gains are low. Whereas with these professional taxes, they're much steadier. And so, we have, and so that's really nice that we have a dedicated source of funding for higher ed. We've never had that. One of the problems with higher ed is that, for example, K-2 is constitutionally protected. It's required. The state is not required to fund higher ed. So I think that is a huge step forward. And it does give us some degree of protection as we, at some point, we're going to have some level of recession, hopefully a much, not like the Great Recession, hopefully it'll be small, but we'll have that at some point, and that source of funding is fairly protected. But do I think it's the end-all and be-all? Should we go out and celebrate and everything's fine? I mean, especially given how expensive, we have become a place to live. We're still behind in terms of salaries. We still don't have the money to do the deferred maintenance. But this was a good step forward, and we hope to build on it. We're not about to, we're there. I think the biggest winners of this legislative session were actually students, because not just the funding to higher ed, but the funding directly through students, through the Washington, what's it called now? Washington State Grant?
Promise?
No, it's not College
Washington
Promise.
College.
What?
The Washington College.
Washington College Grant. It used to be called the State Need Grant. Now it's Washington College Grant.
You've expressed concern on multiple occasions this year for the university's ability to recruit faculty in the years ahead, as much of our current faculty ages into retirement.
Yes.
And I wanted to hear whether that issue was addressed at all in this year's budget, and when that issue might reach an inflection point where it's felt.
Well, it wasn't addressed directly. I mean, we're still not doing as much in terms of compensation as I would like. But again, we are in a position where as we get money for compensation in the future, in the past, the state was giving us 1/3 and we were having to put in the other 2/3, and now we're back to 50-50, which is, very, very helpful. I also think that that's one of the places where I think that the I-1000 will really help us as well in terms of recruiting faculty. So I think this puts us in a better position, but we still have to deal with, there are a lot of different reasons why being able to build more housing for not just low income but moderate income people is important. And one of them is we're recruiting faculty into a very expensive area. And so being able to have housing that's affordable is absolutely critical. And that's why we're looking at these, we're not in a position where we can just, we were able to use our own debt capacity to build dorms for students. We don't have the debt capacity to build, for example, apartments for faculty and staff. So we're looking at public-private partnerships.
In general, how does the recruiting process actually work? And given the volume of faculty that will be leaving, will that process have to be changed at all to account for how much people you need to recruit?
Yeah, it's very decentralized, so that in some ways how you recruit departments at the department and college level they come up with their recruitment strategies. And of course, we do look at that. We have we've got an associate vice provost for faculty diversity that makes sure that hiring plans, that the departments are putting ads in, like for example in psychology, there is a publication for black psychologists, et cetera. We have, and so we want to make sure that we're putting ads there, that we're doing the kind of outreach that we want to do, but it's very individualized. How you recruit a psychology professor, even what time of the year you recruit a psychology professor may be very different than, let's say, civil engineering. Different. Some places do a lot of recruiting at the professional conferences. My understanding is that the Modern Language Association in English, that they do actually interviews right there at the association. Psychology doesn't tend to do that. So, each place is very different in terms of recruiting, but we do at the central level through the provost office and vice provost office make sure that every department, when they ask for a faculty position, we look at the kind of recruiting to do to make sure that they're doing outreach to get as diverse pool as possible. I think that it's that one of the things that we're already seeing that is that it's creating. For example, I didn't have to approve anywhere near as many tenure cases as the new provost will have to, because we hadn't been hiring in a while, and so it does create more work at that level, which I'm very happy to have more work at that level. It does mean that people in the departments, they do the hiring, they're on search committees, et cetera, that they'll be doing more of this. Now, in some ways, in some cases, depending. They might be able to have one committee to recruit for more than one job. Again, it depends on how specialized the area is, et cetera. But I can tell you that even though there's no question that it's more work, people love new colleagues, and it's usually something that they really look forward to, bringing new people into the department. So most people are very happy about the fact that they'll be doing. And quite frankly, there are plenty of great candidates out there. There's both. We are graduating great candidates, but there's people who also graduated during a period where there wasn't a lot of hiring, and they've been sometimes in temporary jobs, et cetera. This may open up more permanent jobs for them. I don't think we're going to have any trouble filling.
We have to wrap up pretty soon, but before we wrap up, is there just a message to students that you haven't been able to articulate this last year?
I think that, the message, one is I think it's really important to be very clear about the fact that I think that higher education is still worth it. I think you're getting a lot of messages that are asking questions about higher education. And I think we are, in a moment where there's a lot of anti-intellectualism that's coming out. And I think that, one of the messages I want to give out is that I think higher education is still very much worth it. And it's worth it not just because of higher capacity for earning and higher capacity for career projection, but also particularly at a time when you have to work a little harder to look behind news stories to see what's real and what's not, that the kinds of knowledge that you get is going to serve you in the future now more than ever before, as well as, it adds all kinds of enjoyment to life. I mean, we know that students that individuals that have college degrees are much more apt to, for example, take care of their health. And there's lower health care jobs. They're much more apt to volunteer and to be engaged in their community. So one message is that I think it's worth it. The other message that I'd like to give to students is that we are working very hard and want to continue to partner with you in terms of keeping higher education accessible. We had a good legislative session because everybody worked hard at it. The partnership with students, being able to go out there together hand in hand to say the state need grant, full funding of the state need grant is really important. Funding higher education is really, our alumni association was involved. I mean, it passed by one vote in the Senate. That's how close it was. And it took everybody working together to say, this is important to our state. Quite frankly, whether you are going
to college, or you have a child in college or not. This is important to our state and to the future of our world. And so I'd like you to know that we want to partner on continuing to make, and then when it comes to the University of Washington in particular, to not only make it accessible, but also to continue to have the same kind of excellence that you've gotten used to. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.